Hello friends, I'm Vitaly Portnikov. President Donald Trump has announced the introduction of a 25% tariff for India. The American president explained this tariff as a response to what he called unfair economic policies from New Delhi. In other words, these are not yet the 100% tariffs that Donald Trump promised to countries that continue energy cooperation with the Russian Federation. However, when Donald Trump spoke about introducing new tariffs for India, he mentioned that India continues to trade energy resources with Russia and also purchases Russian weapons at a time when everyone is interested in stopping Russia's attack on Ukraine. And in this way, the American president warned New Delhi that in addition to the 25% tariff already imposed on Indian goods entering the United States, another 100% could be added. This is quite serious pressure on New Delhi. All the more so, let's recall that India's Minister of Energy recently emphasized that if the United States really does impose sanctions against Russian oil, India is ready to give up this product in order not to spoil relations with the United States. However, at that time, as we understand it, New Delhi was considering more the possibility of a 100% tariff from the United States against India if it remained a buyer of Russian energy resources, rather than the 125% that India might face if both the current Donald Trump tariff remains in place and a new tariff is introduced for allies of the Russian Federation. So it can be said that literally a day after Donald Trump shortened the deadline of his ultimatum to Russian President Putin from 50 days to 10, he moved on to concrete actions, to specific pressure against the allies of the Russian Federation in the energy sector. Of course, no less important than India's position is China's position. The United States Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, who had previously promised to hold talks with Beijing regarding the purchase of Iranian and Russian oil, now says that representatives of the People's Republic of China do not wish to discuss the topic of purchasing Russian oil with American negotiators at all, emphasizing that buying Russian energy resources is a sovereign right for China. Well then, the American Secretary of the Treasury said somewhat sarcastically, if they consider it a sovereign right, they will also get a 100% tariff to go with it. So now, it is quite important to understand how New Delhi and Beijing will respond. In my opinion, India is quite likely to actually stop purchasing Russian oil. Before the start of Russia's so-called Great War against Ukraine, Russia did not play any significant role in the Indian oil market at all. In recent years, the amount of Russian oil purchased by the Russian Federation to supply to India and by India to refine into petroleum products has literally increased several times over. But at the same time, the number of countries from which India buys oil has also increased. Thus, New Delhi can, in fact, quite easily stop buying oil sold by Russian corporations, give up the super profits from purchasing Russian oil in rupees and selling petroleum products made from that oil for dollars, replace it with other oil, perhaps not as cheap, but still profitable, and in this way not fear sanctions from either the United States or the European Union. By the way, at one of the Indian refineries that has already come under European Union sanctions because it produces its petroleum products from Russian oil, they have begun the process of replacing Russian products. With the People's Republic of China, of course, it will be more difficult. It is obvious that for China's leader Xi Jinping, purchasing both Iranian and Russian oil is primarily a political move, not just an economic one. Yes, one could say that Iranian and Russian oil is cheaper for the Chinese economy than any other. However, I have no doubt that Xi Jinping, given the special role China now plays in the global south, would have other options for cheap oil as well. But it is precisely China's purchase of oil from Iran that allows the Ayatollah's regime to continue preparing for its nuclear program and thus remain the main destabilizer in the region, the chief opponent of the United States and Israel, and a direct threat to the existence of the Jewish state. If Beijing were not buying Russian oil, I am absolutely certain that Vladimir Putin would not be able to continue the Russo-Ukrainian war for long. At the very least, he would start thinking about a ceasefire, realizing that the Russian budget would soon lack the funds not only to continue military operations, but also to maintain social stability, which is so important for Putin in order for the war to go on. Then a rather simple question arises. What should we do in this situation, you and I? Now we will be watching the actions of the American administration. Well, it's clear that if the Americans manage to find truly effective tools against both New Delhi and Beijing, if India refuses to buy Russian oil and China at least reduces its intake, the Russian budget could face real serious problems, and Putin would indeed have to consider ending the Russian-Ukrainian war. If, on the other hand, we see that China pays no attention whatsoever to Trump's warnings, doesn't even try to camouflage its further economic alliance with Russia, and buys Russian oil in even greater volumes, this will mean that Putin can also ignore Trump's warnings, and that Russia, on the one hand, becomes a country much more dependent on Chinese support, and on the other hand, an organic part of Beijing's efforts to destabilize the West. And in this form, Putin is undoubtedly needed by Xi Jinping as a proxy force capable of destabilizing both Europe and the Middle East together with Iran, and of demonstrating the inability of the United States to implement presidential plans to end military conflicts. But it is unknown to what extent the state of the Chinese economy will allow the head of the People's Republic of China to openly challenge the American president without any real serious consequences for China's economy. So the coming weeks will be quite important, I would say even decisive, in terms of our understanding of American capabilities and the real substance of the response, not even from the Kremlin, but from the leadership of India, China, and other countries that still continue to purchase Russian oil. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe, follow me on social media, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatello channels which support and develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature right here on YouTube. Wishing you victory and peace. Good luck.